Part 9 is fixed as a silence ending, not a plot ending. The whole story will be engineered toward a final image in which Ethan, after the real merger is abandoned and the private dining room has long emptied, finds Claire's old check slip folded beside his untouched Swiss watch.
No confession.
No grand reconciliation. Only a handwritten correction on the forged clause he once used to test her, and below it one quiet line in ink. He looks toward the doorway where she had stood hours before. She is already gone. He does not call her back. Instead, he removes his signature from the real acquisition papers and slowly sets his fountain pen beside the diner receipt, as if laying down a weapon. A junior associate enters, waiting for orders. Ethan says nothing, just slides the contract into the fire. The only sound is paper curling in flame. Later, as Claire wipes the last table under rain-lit windows, the maitre d' places an envelope beside her coffee without a word. Inside is not a job offer, not money, only a single restaurant bill paid in full, with one handwritten amendment where the tip should be. Next time, I'll read slower. Claire's fingers rest on the ink. She does not smile, only looks through the window as a black car pauses at the curb, then drives away. That departure is the emotional reversal, not possession, recognition. The ending lands on a small human shift made visible through objects, pauses, and withheld speech. Every part from 1 through 8 will naturally move toward this moment by building Ethan from examiner to listener and Claire from hidden witness to moral mirror. The final sentence will remain quiet and resonant, something in the register of, some truths do not change a deal. They change the hand that signs it. Tell me where you learned corporate fraud law, the billionaire said, sliding the document across white linen as though it were a joke, because that clause just killed a $40 billion merger. The room did not breathe. Crystal glasses stood untouched beneath amber light. Rain tapped softly against the tall windows of the private dining room 40 floors above Manhattan. Ethan Caldwell leaned back in his chair, silver cufflinks catching the glow, waiting to see the waitress flinch. Most people did. Claire Whitmore did not. She stood beside the table holding a coffee pot in one hand, black uniform immaculate, pale gold hair pinned with practical precision, as ordinary as any woman who had spent 8 hours carrying plates through a crowded steakhouse. At least that was what everyone in the room believed. Her eyes moved once across the contract.
Once.
Then she set the coffee pot down. Clause 7 doesn't kill the merger, she said quietly. It hides the fraud. A partner from Boston laughed under his breath. Someone muttered that this had gone too far. Ethan's half-smile stayed fixed, but something in his eyes sharpened.
Go on, he said.
Claire touched the edge of the paper, not timidly, almost as if recognizing an old scar. The Shell acquisition routes debt through a dormant Delaware entity. Anti-dilution protections collapse on page 19. The buyer absorbs the liability after close. She lifted her gaze. It's structured to look legal to people who read too fast. Silence widened around the table. The rain sounded louder. Ethan did not blink. For the first time all night, his fingers left the rim of his scotch glass. No one in the room knew Ethan had planted the fake merger draft as a private game. A test. He had done versions of it for years. A way to amuse himself, to expose pretenders, to prove brilliance was rare. But the waitress was not playing by the script. How? He asked, voice lower now. Did you see that in 10 seconds? Claire gave the faintest shrug. Fraud likes repetition. Then she reached for the water pitcher, as though discussing wine pairings, and refilled a glass. The movement was so calm it unsettled him more than the answer. Across the table, a managing director whispered, "Who is she?" Ethan ignored him. His attention stayed on Claire's wrist, where an old Swiss watch sat worn but polished, too elegant for a waitress salary. He noticed her hands too. Not soft hands. Precise hands. Hands used to marking pages. Claire stepped back. Your ribeye will be out in 6 minutes, Mr. Caldwell. The formality almost sounded like a dismissal. Ethan watched. Her cross the room, her posture quiet, unhurried, untouched by what had just happened. Men who moved markets sat speechless because a woman carrying coffee had punctured a trap in seconds. Yet what unsettled Ethan was not that she saw the fraud. It was the strange suspicion she had seen him. He looked back down at the document he himself had engineered, and suddenly it felt less like a test and more like evidence. Near Clause 7, in pencil he did not remember writing. A small note appeared in the margin. One line. Clean handwriting. Interesting place to hide a lie. Ethan's pulse slowed. He had not seen her write it. Across the room, Claire lifted a tray, spoke gently to another table, and vanished into warm restaurant noise as though nothing had shifted. But something had. The men around Ethan began speaking again in nervous fragments, yet their words seemed far away. He folded the contract once, carefully, almost respectfully, and for the first time in years, the man who tested everyone wondered if he had just been measured himself. The dinner rush rolled on as if nothing extraordinary had happened, but Ethan Caldwell had stopped tasting his food. The ribeye cooled untouched beneath a silver dome, while he watched Claire move through the room with the effortless precision of someone who belonged to a rhythm older than panic. She poured Bordeaux for a hedge fund founder, laughed softly at an old couple celebrating 40 years, then vanished through the kitchen doors carrying empty dessert plates.
No flerish.
No awareness, she had unsettled a room of men who negotiated billion-dollar deals before breakfast. Ethan folded the contract again and slipped it inside his jacket. The note in the margin seemed heavier than paper. Beside him, Martin Reeves from Boston leaned in. You set that up to embarrass her, did you not? Ethan swirled the melting ice in his glass. I set it up to see who notices structure. Martin smiled thinly. And she noticed you. The words stayed with him. For years Ethan had believed people revealed themselves under pressure. That was how he built companies, acquired rivals, read weakness. But Claire had not reacted like someone under pressure. She had responded like someone revisiting a familiar wound. That difference bothered him. When the dinner ended, the others drifted toward elevators speaking in clipped tones about valuation models and market openings in Tokyo. Ethan did not join them. Instead, he crossed the dining room alone. The maitre d', startled, straightened his tie. Mr. Caldwell, your driver is waiting downstairs. Where's the waitress? The question sounded too direct even to him. Claire's off in 15 minutes. Ethan glanced toward the kitchen pass. Through steam and polished steel, he saw her writing an order ticket, sleeves rolled slightly, old Swiss watch glinting beneath fluorescent light. He could have left. He did not. He sat at the empty corner table and waited. Outside, rain traced silver lines down the glass. 15 minutes became 30. At last Claire emerged carrying her coat, a worn camel overcoat too elegant to be cheap and too old to be fashionable. She froze only for a fraction when she saw him. We are closed, Mr. Caldwell. So is my patience, he said, then softened. Sit for 5 minutes. She considered him, then set her keys beside a coffee cup and remained standing. People with your money usually do not ask twice. People with your judgment usually do not work in a steakhouse. Something like amusement flickered in her eyes. That almost sounded respectful. Ethan reached into his jacket and laid the folded merger draft on the table. Who taught you to read traps like this? Claire looked at the paper, but did not touch it. Experience charges tuition. Law school, he pressed. Life. She moved to leave. Ethan surprised himself. Wait. The word carried no command now. Only curiosity. Claire turned. Rain shimmered behind her like moving glass. Why write in the margin? She asked quietly. Ethan frowned. I thought you wrote it. She stared at him, and for one suspended second neither spoke. Then she stepped closer, unfolded the contract, and ran a finger beneath the pencil note. That is not my handwriting. Ethan felt something cold move through him. Then who? Claire looked toward the dark windows, expression unreadable. Maybe, she said softly. Some lies leave fingerprints before people do. She folded the paper once, placed it back before him, and walked toward the door. Ethan did not stop her. He only watched as she paused beneath the streetlight outside, lifted her collar against the rain, and disappeared into Manhattan night. On the table, beside the untouched coffee, lay something she had left behind without a word. A business card yellowed at the edges. On it, embossed in fading blue letters, Whitmore and Hale, Mergers and Acquisitions. Ethan stared as the room went very still. At 2 a.m, Ethan Caldwell was still awake, the yellowed business card resting beside quarterly earnings reports on a walnut desk that had witnessed hostile takeovers, midnight restructurings, and decisions that moved markets. Yet none of those papers held his attention. Whitmore and Hale, Mergers and Acquisitions. The name stirred no immediate memory, but old instincts had already awakened. He tapped a secure line. Run a full search, he told his chief of staff. Defunct firms, bar records, litigation history. Priority. By dawn, Manhattan wore a pale winter light, and Ethan stood before the glass wall of his office, coffee untouched again. Below, yellow cabs slid through wet streets like currents. His assistant entered carrying a thin black folder. You asked for everything on Claire Whitmore. Ethan opened it. The first page held a photograph taken years earlier on courthouse steps. Claire, younger but unmistakable, in a navy suit, hair pinned the same way, holding legal briefs beneath one arm. Beside the photo, a headline. Rising M and a counsel exposes acquisition irregularities. Ethan read in silence. She had not merely practiced law. She had been brilliant. Columbia Law, top of her class. Recruited into one of the most aggressive merger boutiques on the East Coast. Then abruptly gone.
No disbarment.
No scandal on record. Just disappearance. Ethan turned a page and stopped. A case summary from 9 years earlier. A contested merger challenged over hidden debt transfers through shell entities. The structure resembled his fake deal almost line for line. He sat slowly. Who built this model, he
asked.
Whitmore flagged the fraud before closing, his assistant said. But the complaint was withdrawn. Her partner took over. Firm dissolved a year later. Ethan's jaw tightened. Partner's name. Daniel Hale. Something in the room seemed to narrow.
Hale.
The second name on the card. Ethan looked again at the penciled note on the contract lying beside the folder. Interesting place to hide a lie. He heard Claire's voice in it now. Or perhaps wanted to. Before noon, he found himself doing something no one in his company had seen in years. He canceled a board lunch. At 1:15, he walked back into the steakhouse. Daylight made the restaurant gentler, stripped of last night's power theater. Lunch crowds murmured over martinis and business talk. Claire was there, balancing a tray near the window. She saw him, did not appear surprised. You came back for lunch? For answers. She set down menus at another table before approaching. Dangerous appetite. Ethan placed the old business card between them. Why leave this? Claire studied it a moment. I did not leave it by accident. Then why vanish from that world? Her face remained still, but her fingers tightened once around an order pad. Because sometimes exposing a fraud does not punish the liar. Ethan said nothing. She continued, voice almost lost beneath silverware and conversation. Sometimes it punishes the one who refuses to sign. He felt the words settle heavier than accusation. Daniel Hale, he asked quietly. A long pause. Then she gave the smallest nod. He taught me how men hide greed inside legal language. And you walked away. Claire looked toward the rain-bright window.
No.
I was pushed. A customer called for coffee. She turned to leave, then stopped. Mr. Caldwell. Ethan. For the first time, she used his name. If you came here to rescue a fallen lawyer, you are too late. And if I came because I think someone stole your career? Claire almost smiled, but it carried no softness. Then read slower. She walked away carrying a fresh pot of coffee, and Ethan remained standing beside the window, watching her move through ordinary light with the quiet gravity of someone who had survived. What powerful men preferred forgotten. For the first time in years, a deal no longer looked like conquest to him. It looked like confession. 3 days later, Ethan sat in the 42nd floor boardroom staring at a real merger packet worth $12 billion, yet all he saw was Claire's finger tracing a hidden liability across fake paper. Morning light fell hard against polished glass. 12 executives waited. Screens glowed with projections. Lawyers shifted through binders thick as city phone books. In any other season, Ethan would have signed before lunch. Instead, he turned to page 87 and froze. A familiar structure. A debt transfer routed through a dormant subsidiary in Nevada. Different language. Same skeleton. His pulse slowed. Who drafted this indemnity stack, he asked. Outside counsel answered too quickly. Standard protective layering. Ethan did not move. Standard for whom? Silence brushed the room. A senior banker cleared his throat. If there's concern, we can revise after close. Ethan heard Claire's voice as if she stood at the far end of the table. Fraud likes repetition. He closed the binder. Meeting adjourned. Shock rippled around the room. Sir, one director protested. We have investors flying in from Chicago. Ethan rose. Then let them enjoy Manhattan. He walked out before anyone answered. 40 minutes later, he was in the steakhouse again, this time before the lunch rush, carrying the real merger file under his arm. Claire was polishing silverware near the bar. She looked at the binder first, then him. You brought me contraband. I brought a question. He laid the file on a corner table. Tell me if I am paranoid.
Claire did not sit.
She opened the packet standing, flipping pages with unsettling speed. Her eyes narrowed once. Then again. Ethan watched not her face but the moments she went still. Those pauses meant something. Finally, she tapped a clause buried deep in schedules. This is not protective layering. What is it? A slow siphon. She traced the structure. They move pension liabilities after close. Nobody notices until the workforce pays for it. Ethan felt heat rise under calm. How many would be affected? Claire did not dramatize. Maybe 6,000. The number hung there, ordinary and devastating. He looked at her. Why do you still know all this after walking away? She gave a small, almost tired exhale. Knowledge does not resign when people do. He laughed once, quietly, not from humor but recognition. Then, he did something stranger. Come with me tonight. Claire lifted an eyebrow. That sounded dangerously close to an invitation. Board review. I need another set of eyes. She shook her head.
Y pour coffee, Ethan.
No, he said softly. You read what others hope stays unread. She studied him so long, he almost regretted speaking. Then she pushed the file back. I will not walk into a room that once shut women like me out. Then help me shut something else down. The line surprised even him. Claire looked toward the windows where winter light silvered the street. At last she reached for a pen from her apron and wrote 2 words in the margin beside the clause. Follow ownership. She slid the file back. Start there. Before he could answer, the restaurant owner called her name. She moved away into the ordinary choreography of lunch service. Ethan remained staring at those 2 words. That evening, forensic analysts traced hidden entities through 3 offshore layers. Claire had been right again. At midnight, Ethan canceled the merger. The market would call it caution by morning. He knew better. It was interruption. Yet what unsettled him most was not that a waitress had saved him from a fraudulent deal. It was that he had begun waiting for her judgment before trusting his own. The cancellation sent tremors through lower Manhattan before dawn. Financial news called Ethan Caldwell unpredictable. Competitors called him reckless. His own board called an emergency session. Yet through all of it, one thought returned with irritating clarity. Follow ownership. 2 words in a waitress's handwriting had prevented a disaster 12 teams of analysts had missed. That fact did not flatter him. It unsettled him. 2 evenings later, snow drifted in slow spirals over Midtown as Ethan entered the steakhouse after closing. Chairs were turned upside down on tables. Floors shone from fresh polish. Only one light burned near the back booth where Claire sat alone, ledger open, reading with a pencil tucked behind one ear. Not reading menus. Reading a legal opinion. He stopped a few feet away. You work after hours too? Claire looked up. Some habits survive humiliation. He slid into the opposite booth uninvited, but less like a billionaire claiming space and more like a man asking for permission too late. Between them, he placed a worn file folder. I found something. Claire did not touch it. Ethan opened it himself. Inside were records tied to Daniel Hale. Quiet transfers. Dissolved entities. Old partnership distributions routed, through names neither had expected. Claire leaned forward slowly. Her stillness deepened. Where did you get these? From an archive no one thought to revisit. Ethan lowered his voice. Your partner did not just bury fraud. He profited from the collapse of clients after exposing them. Claire said nothing. Her hand rested lightly on the table, but he saw her knuckles pale. For a moment he thought he had pushed too far. Then she asked almost absently, "Why are you doing this?" Ethan looked at the snow against the window before answering. Because I built my career believing intelligence was a weapon. He met her eyes. You use it like conscience. The words seemed to catch her off guard more than the file. She turned a page. There, buried in old partnership correspondence, was a memorandum initialed DH approving the same liability structure she once refused to sign. Her breath left almost soundlessly. I knew, she whispered, but I never had proof. Ethan did not reach across the table, did not offer comfort, only waited. After a long silence, Claire closed the folder. You still think this began when you tested me with a fake deal? It did not. A faint smile, almost sad.
No, Ethan.
It began when you unknowingly copied the architecture of the fraud that ended my life in law. He stared. My model came from a training deck acquired in a merger 10 years ago. Claire looked at him steadily. Then someone taught you from poison paper. The realization moved through him like cold light. Even. His test had roots in deception older than either of them knew. A waiter from the kitchen left 2 coffees without interrupting. Steam curled upward between them. Ordinary, fragile. Claire touched the cup, but did not drink. Do you know what Daniel used to say before every closing? Ethan shook his head. If nobody sees the trap, it is not a crime. It is strategy. She looked toward the darkened room. I believed him once. Ethan answered softly. And now? Claire's fingers rested on the old Swiss watch. Now I serve men who think strategy has no victims. He almost laughed, but there was no cynicism left in it. One of them is learning. Snow thickened outside. They sat without speaking for several breaths. Then Claire pushed the folder back toward him. Do not use this to punish him. Ethan frowned. What then? She held his gaze. Use it to expose what survives him. It was not revenge she wanted. It was correction. Ethan understood the difference only because she forced him to. As he rose to leave, Claire stopped him with a quiet question. Why did you really come tonight? He paused, hand on his coat. Because I needed to know whether saving a deal was all you were doing. And Ethan looked at her, at the woman who had turned contracts into mirrors. No, he said. You have been rewriting the man reading them. The following Monday, Ethan did something his board considered impossible. He invited Claire Whitmore into Caldwell Capital. Not as a consultant on paper. Not as a favor. As an observer. The invitation itself arrived handwritten on restaurant stationery, folded beneath her morning coffee before a lunch shift. One sentence. Read this one slower. At 4 o'clock, she stepped into the tower, wearing a charcoal coat and carrying no briefcase, only the old leather notebook Ethan had never seen before. Security guards looked at her uniform shoes with polite confusion. Executives looked longer. Ethan met her in the lobby, not from the elevator bank above, but in person. That detail did not go unnoticed. You came, he said. Claire glanced up at the steel and glass atrium. I wanted to see whether power always echoes this much. A corner of his mouth moved. In the boardroom, a live review was underway over a distressed acquisition involving a manufacturing group in Ohio. 12 people around the table. Screens full of models. Voices clipped and practiced. Ethan took a seat, then did something that made even his general counsel stare. Claire has a question before we proceed. She remained standing. No performance. No attempt to impress. She turned one page of the presentation and asked, why does workforce liability appear in footnotes, but executive retention bonuses sit on page 2? Silence. One banker forced a smile. That is market convention. Claire looked at him as if examining a miscalculation. Convenience is not convention. Ethan said nothing. Let the word sit. A younger associate at the far end, nervous and eager, objected. With respect, she is not on this deal team. Claire nodded. Neither is the pension fund carrying the risk. Ethan almost smiled. There it was again. The quiet blade. By the end of the meeting, the structure was rewritten. Not because Claire argued. Because she asked questions no one could comfortably dismiss. As the room emptied, one senior partner lingered beside Ethan. Who is she really? Ethan watched Claire gather nothing but her notebook. Someone who reads what we stopped seeing. Later, in his office, dusk turning the Hudson silver, Ethan poured coffee instead of scotch. Claire stood by the window studying tugboats moving below. You invited me here to prove something to your board? She asked. No, he handed her a thick envelope. To return something. She opened it. Inside were restored copies of filings tied to her old case, newly authenticated, with motions prepared to reopen the buried fraud inquiry. Claire did not react at first. That unsettled him more than tears would have. Finally, she asked, almost a whisper, "Why would you do this for me?" Ethan leaned against the desk. At first I thought I was correcting a wrong. He paused. Now I think I am correcting an education. Her fingers rested on the papers. You know, reopening this could touch people still powerful. I have met some. For the first time she laughed, brief and warm, changing the whole room. Then her expression quieted. There is something you still do not understand, Ethan. Tell me. Claire closed the file. The night you tested me with that fake merger, I recognized the structure in seconds because Daniel Hale used the same trap. Ethan nodded. I know. No, she said softly. I recognize something else too. She stepped closer, not intimate but direct. Your test was never only yours. He frowned. What do you mean? Claire opened her leather notebook and turned it toward him. Inside, yellowed and marked with old annotations, lay the original training deck where Ethan had first learned deal structures as a young analyst. His handwritten notes lined the margins. He stared, blood going cold. How do you have this? Claire held his gaze. Because before it ever reached you, I helped write it. The room went utterly still. Years folded inward without warning. Ethan looked from the notes to her face, and for the first time the game of who was testing whom no longer had a clear answer. The air in Ethan's office seemed to thin around the old training deck resting open between them. His younger handwriting filled the margins with ambition, sharp questions, acquisition shortcuts, formulas he had once believed were intelligence itself. But beneath those notes, in elegant blue ink older than his own, were annotations he had never noticed. Corrections. Warnings. Ethical flags buried like whispers inside machinery. Claire touched one line with her fingertip. I wrote those the year before Daniel altered the final model. Ethan looked up slowly. I studied this for months. You studied the version after it was compromised. Her voice held no triumph. Only fact. Ethan sank into the leather chair as if the room had shifted under him. Then the test I gave you was built from the fraud that destroyed me. Silence spread, almost sacred. Beyond the glass wall, dusk deepened over Manhattan, lights rising one by one like distant signals. Ethan gave a short breath that might once have become laughter. I thought I was measuring you. Claire closed the notebook. I knew on the first page you were measuring what had already failed you. He stared at her. You knew from that first night. Yes. And you let me continue. Claire tilted her head.
No.
I watched whether you could still change. The words struck deeper than accusation. For years, Ethan had tested loyalty, intelligence, fear. He had never considered he himself could be the subject of a quieter examination. How long, he asked, have you been testing me? Claire looked toward the city. Since you canceled the real merger. He stood and crossed to the window beside her. Two reflections in the glass, almost strangers. And did I pass? A small pause. Then, you're still being graded. Something warm and unguarded moved through him. At that moment his chief counsel burst in without knocking, face pale with urgency. We have a problem. Ethan turned. A legal notice had arrived. Daniel Hale, now senior advisor to a major private fund, had filed injunction threats to block reopening the old fraud inquiry. Attached was an offer. Quiet settlement. Confidential. Generous. Claire read the document once and set it down. He still believes silence has a market price. Ethan looked at her, waiting. She surprised him by pushing the paper back untouched. Do nothing tonight. He is threatening us. No, Claire said softly. He is testing whether you still mistake pressure for truth. The old language returned like an echo. Ethan dismissed counsel and shut the office door. For a long moment neither moved. Then he opened a secure cabinet, withdrew the pending settlement response, and placed a fountain pen beside it. Tell me what to sign. Claire did not reach for the pen. Instead, she turned the settlement over and wrote a single sentence across the blank back page. Not a refusal. A question. Who carries the hidden liabilities after you leave? Ethan read it twice. It was devastating in its simplicity. Not legal defense. Moral exposure. Send that, he asked. Send only that. He looked at her in disbelief. It could unsettle the whole negotiation. Exactly. He signed nothing that night. He sent the question. By morning, Daniel Hale's fund requested emergency talks. The first crack. Yet what stayed with Ethan was not the tactical victory. It was something smaller. As Claire prepared to leave, she paused at his office door and adjusted the old Swiss watch at her wrist. There is one more thing you should know, she said. What? She met his gaze fully now. The night I recognized your fake merger, I stayed because I wanted to see whether a man trained on corrupted principles could learn uncorrupted ones. Ethan asked quietly, and now? Claire rested her hand on the doorknob. Now I am curious. Then she left, and Ethan remained alone with the unsigned pen beside him, realizing the greatest reversal was no longer in the contracts they were dismantling, but in the strange fact that he now feared disappointing a waitress more than losing $1 billion deal. The reply Daniel Hale sent arrived just before sunrise.
No denial.
No threat. Only a request for a private meeting at Caldwell Capital. Ethan read the message twice, then looked at the handwritten question Claire had composed the night before. Who carries the hidden liabilities after you leave? It had done what armies of litigators had not. It had unsettled the man who once taught fraud as strategy. By afternoon, the conference room was prepared, but Ethan had made one unusual condition.
Claire would sit in.
When she entered in her simple black dress beneath a winter coat, carrying nothing but the old leather notebook, the senior partners fell silent in a way they no longer tried to hide. She took a seat near the end of the long walnut table, not at Ethan's side, but not outside the circle either. That mattered. Daniel Hale arrived 5 minutes late, silver-haired, polished, smiling with the brittle warmth of men accustomed to negotiating from altitude. His eyes moved to Claire and paused. A flicker. Recognition wrapped in calculation. Claire, he said almost tenderly. Still reading footnotes. She answered without expression. Still hiding in them? Even Ethan felt the air sharpen. The meeting began. Hale spoke of misunderstandings, legacy structures, market complexity, elegant phrases, expensive evasions. Ethan listened, but did not interrupt. Claire said almost nothing. She simply turned pages as Hale spoke, placing small pencil marks beside statements that bent around.
Truth.
At one point, Hale gestured toward Ethan. Surely you understand the necessity of moral compromise in high finance. Ethan glanced toward Claire. She did not look up, just wrote one word in her notebook and rotated it toward him.
Necessary?
Ethan leaned forward. No, he said quietly. I am beginning to understand its cost. Silence followed. It was not dramatic. It was worse. It forced honesty into the room. Then Claire did something no one expected. She slid across the table the original training deck with both their old annotations. You taught men this model after removing every warning. Hale looked down, color shifting almost imperceptibly. You kept this. I kept the part you erased. Her voice stayed level, but something in Ethan recognized it as victory stripped of spectacle. Hale reached for his water glass but stopped. For the first time, his confidence showed seams. What followed was not confrontation but unraveling. Hale agreed to reopen disclosures, restore pension protections, and submit records once thought buried. Not because he was cornered by aggression. Because two people had refused his language. When the meeting ended, board members lingered in stunned murmurs. Hale departed without looking back. Snow drifted against the windows. Ethan remained seated long after others left. Claire gathered her notebook.
It is done, he said.
No, she answered softly. Something was corrected. That is different. He walked her to the lobby in silence. The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside, then turned. There is a final review tonight, Ethan said. A new merger.
Clean structure this time.
I want you there. Claire studied him, almost amused. You still ask the waitress to check your homework. Only because she grades harder than my board. The elevator doors almost closed. Then she stopped them with one hand. Bring the papers to the restaurant after close. Why there? A faint smile. Truth behaves better near coffee. Hours later, Ethan arrived after midnight carrying the new merger packet. The dining room was empty except one lamp glowing over Claire's corner booth. She read in silence while snow pressed white against the glass.
At
last she set the papers down, drew a line through one unnecessary executive bonus clause, and pushed them back. Now it is clean. Ethan looked not at the papers, but at her hand resting near his fountain pen. For a long moment neither moved. Then he slid the pen toward her. You sign first. Claire looked almost startled. Slowly she took it, initialed the margin as reviewer, then returned the pen. A gesture so small no market would ever notice. Yet Ethan felt more altered by that shared signature than by any acquisition he had ever closed. Outside, a black car idled at the curb. Claire gathered her coat. Before leaving, she left the diner receipt beneath his watch. One handwritten line where the total should have been. Read slower. Trust quieter. Ethan watched her step into the snow and did not call her back. He only looked at the ink, then at the unsigned copy of the merger waiting beside him, knowing the final decision would not be about a deal at all, but about what kind of man now lifted the pen. Morning came pale and windless over Manhattan. Ethan had not left the restaurant booth. The unsigned merger rested beside the diner receipt, Claire's ink still dark where she had written read slower. Trust quieter. Dawn touched the window, turning the snow outside into silver dust. He picked up the fountain pen, looked at the executive bonus clause she had crossed out, and without ceremony struck it from the final agreement. Then he signed. Not with the practiced sweep he once used for conquest, but slowly, almost listening. Hours later the board assembled expecting applause. Instead, Ethan placed the executed merger on the table and said only, employee protections remain. Bonuses do not. No speech followed. No one argued. Something in his silence made argument feel small. By afternoon, the market praised the deal's unusual ethics, as if such things could be priced. Ethan ignored the headlines. At dusk, he walked back to the restaurant carrying no files. Just the old Swiss training deck, now rebound in leather. Claire was closing alone, chairs turned up, jazz drifting low from a radio near the bar. She looked at the book in his hand. You kept it. Ethan placed it beside her coffee. It belongs to the person who corrected it. Claire did not open it. Instead, she reached beneath the register and slid him his bill from that first night, preserved under clear paper. On the back, where only now he noticed, she had written a date from years ago. The date he had first joined the analyst program that taught him corrupted principles. He looked up. You remembered. Claire gave the smallest shrug. Some contracts are signed before people know they entered them. The old Swiss watch slipped loose as she reached for a cloth. Its leather strap had cracked. Without thinking, Ethan removed his own watch, the one that had flashed coldly in boardrooms for a decade, and set it beside hers. Not as a gift. As replacement. Claire stared at the two watches resting together on the counter, old leather beside polished steel. For a moment, neither moved. Then she took his expensive watch, turned it over, and set it back in his palm. Keep yours. She lifted her worn one, tightened the strap, and smiled almost invisibly. It still keeps honest time. Ethan laughed under his breath, softer than he had in years. A black car idled outside again, his driver waiting. He did not leave. Claire carried 2 coffees to the window table, and they stood there without speaking, watching people hurry through the cold below, each carrying invisible urgencies. After a while, Ethan slid the diner receipt toward her and wrote beneath her line 1 sentence of his own. She read it, folded the receipt once, and placed it inside the old training deck. The maitre d' dimmed the lights and quietly left them alone. At last, Claire gathered her coat.
At the door, she paused.
"Will you still test people?" she asked without turning. Ethan looked at the empty chair where she had once stood as a waitress beside a fake contract. "Less often," he said. "And slower." She nodded, opened the door, then stopped as if remembering something. She walked back, reached for the fountain pen he had left on the table, and tucked it into his breast pocket with the same calm precision she once used correcting clauses. No romance in the gesture. Something quieter. Recognition. Then she left into the winter air. Ethan remained by the window as the black car rolled away without him. On the table, the folded receipt had slipped partly open. His final line showed in blue ink. "Some truths do not change a deal. They change the hand that signs it."